Good afternoon. There must be some Catholic Sewell people here. Good afternoon. All right. Welcome to Georgetown University. My name is John Carr. I, along with Kim Daniels, is co-director of the Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life here at Georgetown. Like so many of you, I thought Mark Shields was one of my best friends. And that was before I met him. So today we gather hundreds, even thousands of Mark's best friends. More than 2,220 people registered for this celebration of Mark's life and legacy. 600 here in historic Gaston Hall, and more than 1,600 from around the nation who are going to receive a video. I want to thank you for your fortitude and patience in joining us and complying with the COVID requirements. Georgetown, we know, is not the easiest place to get to. It's been said that it's easier to get an honorary degree at Georgetown than convenient free parking. It has been 100 days since Mark died. We had a wonderful funeral at Blessed Sacrament Church, and many of you were there. This is like a church in that we have some reserved seats up front and people can come down if you wish. You can tell you're at a Catholic gathering, no one's in the front row, and they often take up a collection, no collection. But, the link to the funeral is in your program because if you didn't hear it, there is a chance to hear the wonderful tributes from Carolyn Ryan, Al Hunt, Bill Peterson, and Peter Hart. This is a time not for a funeral, but for a celebration, not sadness, for remembering what he gave us, not what we have lost, for recalling Mark's leadership and appreciating his legacy. Georgetown and our initiative are honored to host this celebration. Mark may be a son of Notre Dame, but he was a great friend of Georgetown, and that extended beyond the basketball team. Mark was a key architect, supporter, and participant in our initiative. You may have seen him on the cover of the brochure. He was part of our first Francis Factor dialogue with Kim Daniels, David Brooks, and Alexia Kelly shortly after Pope Francis was elected. Mark was a Pope Francis Catholic before there was a Pope Francis. He embodied what Francis called the joy of the gospel and was a symbol of the Pope's call for a better kind of politics. Our initiative in Georgetown are hosting this celebration because Mark Shields modeled the values at the heart of our work: civility and dialogue, respect and humor, human dignity and solidarity, a conviction that politics ought to serve the common good and faith should seek justice. Mark said he was born a Democrat and baptized a Catholic. He loved his party and his church enough to challenge their failures, insisting they should pursue converts, not punish heretics. Here is our plan for this gathering. We will have 2 roundtables where people have been invited to briefly share one story or one lesson. We think we have assembled the Sanity Caucus in a crazy Washington. The first focuses on Mark's work, politics and journalism. The second on Mark's commitment to family and friends. I share the regrets of Father Monk Malloy, who could not be here because of a funeral. You may look at the program and say, I have to get home before tomorrow. I want to reassure you, before he died, Mark left instructions for how he should be remembered. No tribute is to last more than 3 minutes, and we have timers and wonderful moderators to make that happen. All of us have a Mark Shields story, and when we change roundtables, I will ask you to share your Mark Shields story with the person next to you. And finally, we will have reflections from David Brooks, Mark's partner in the NewsHour for 19 years, and Ann Shields, his partner in life and love for 55 years. So we come together today to recall why we love Mark, why we miss him, and how we remember him. I see my time is up, so I want to call on and thank Judy Woodruff for leading our first roundtable on Mark Shields' politics and journalism.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, John Carr, for pulling this wonderful event together. Thanks to you and the incomparable Ann Shields for inviting all of us here. Ann. I am so honored to be here today. If there were any doubt about how much love there is in the world for Mark Shields, just look around this room. Look around this room. And I have the great pleasure of moderating this illustrious group, this panel, each of whom will share something from their relationship with Mark. And at his request, as you just heard from John, there's a 3-minute limit. Now, each one of you has promised to obey. I will say, since I'm the moderator, I get a little dispensation. Just the people you are going to hear from, and I'm going to name them now quickly. You're going to hear from them in a moment. David Gergen, former NewsHour analyst with Mark, now a professor at Harvard. Amy Walter of the Cook Political Report with Amy Walter, PBS NewsHour analyst now. Colby King, Washington Post columnist, former Inside Washington panelist. Kathleen Sebelius, the former governor of Kansas, former Secretary of Health and Human Services. Tom Davis, who was a Republican member of Congress representing Virginia, and the Ragin' Cajun political strategist, James Carville. You're going to hear from them all shortly, and we will applaud them magnanimously then. I'm going to start, and as I said, I'll try to stick to 3 minutes. When I arrived in Washington in 1977, one of the first people I met was Mark Shields. What a gift. Mark was in Al's and my wedding. He and Ann were the godparents of our first child, Jeffrey, with whom I just got off the phone, and he sends his love. There have been 40 years of Christmas Eves at the Shields, more than 25 New York City weekends with them for basketball tournaments, for theater and dinner, and of course, my Fridays with Mark on the NewsHour. Every moment was a delight. At Mark's funeral at Blessed Sacrament, Al said, when we were in New York, Mark was the mayor of Madison Square Garden. He was also the mayor of every Broadway show we went to, every dinner, every deli. Walking down the street, people recognized him. They wanted an autograph or a picture. Ann and Amy, it wasn't that he was just another pretty face on television. They connected with this man, with your dad and your husband. People instinctively warmed to Mark. They sensed his generosity, his decency, his humor. Even if it were curtain call time at the theater or the start of the second half of a game, Mark always took time to share a piece of his wit or wisdom. Around America, we know there are countless people, otherwise strangers, who still regale family and friends about their time with Mark Shields. Can any of us think of a time when we were with Mark where we didn't come away feeling better? Mark was passionate about the importance of politics. He thought it the peaceable resolution of conflict among competing legitimate interests, and he had a special fondness for politicians who were in the arena. He once asked, how many captains of industry, academics, journalists would be willing to expose their egos to the scrutiny, the indifference, maybe the heartbreak of a campaign where everyone the candidate ever double-dated with knows whether they lost or won? That fondness included Republicans who treated the business seriously, like Tom Davis, who's here with us today, like Mitch Daniels and Jack Kemp, to name a few of them. But Mark was a passionate Democrat, raised on FDR and JFK, convinced to his last day that Bobby Kennedy, for whom he was so proud to have worked, would have been a great president. He felt someone, whether it was Bobby Kennedy or anyone else, they should be about bringing together working class people of all races. A role of government, Mark believed, was to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And he didn't pull punches. One candidate, he observed, was about as exciting as a quiche bake-off in Toledo, Ohio. When President Bush 43 nominated Bernard Kerik to be the Secretary of Homeland Security, Mark told Jim Lehrer, "The guy's got more skeletons than an anatomy lab at the Harvard Medical School." At the NewsHour, he was family for 33 years. Every Friday, he would bring a bag full of giant, still warm cookies from his favorite bakery. His enormous journalistic talents were matched by his personal warmth and kindness to everyone. Makeup artist Leah Margosas, here with us somewhere in this room today, who absolutely adored him. To the youngest producer, we all revered him. Alex Delia, who in her 20s produced the Brooks Shields segment. She traveled here today from Portugal and says when she's 60 years old, one of the great privileges of her life will have been working with Mark Shields. No doubt one of the main reasons for that is Mark's inner compass. Just a couple of days after the 2020 election, as former President Trump began to insist that it was stolen, about a month before he retired from the NewsHour, Mark said of the fact that not a single Republican senator had agreed to be interviewed about this. Mark said it reminded him of Dante's great quote that the hottest places in hell are reserved for those who in a time of moral crisis remain neutral. Today, at this university for which he had such regard, we are celebrating a remarkable life and how lucky we all are to have known and loved this special man. And now, please welcome David Gergen.
Good afternoon, Anne, Amy, Francis, and everyone here. My years with Mark Shields were among the greatest gifts I've ever received. From the late 80s into the 90s, 5 years, we paired up on Friday nights on the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer, Judy Woodruff, and other anchors. We had wonderful times together. Mark was the gold standard of political commentary in that era. I tended to think about politics from 30,000 feet. Mark wanted to know the human side of the story, down on the ground, who was doing what to whom. I rang up think tanks. He traveled to small towns talking to working people. At airports, as we've heard, fans would stop him about every 10 feet. He always connected. I especially liked making speeches together early in the new year. He always had some new jokes to crack. I went with pen in hand, hoping to steal a few for the months ahead. When first we met, he liked to say that his two best decisions in life were to marry Ann Shields and to sign up with the Washington Speakers Bureau. Very quickly, the NewsHour became still another passion. Let's face it, Mark was a beloved figure at a time when politics were still civil. He brought love and laughter everywhere he went. That so many of us are standing up for him today tells us that we will miss him forever. Thank you.
Amy Walter of the Cook Political Report.
Thank you.
Judy always has to get that. And thank you, Judy. And Amy, thank you for having me here. This is such an honor for me to be here. And I was having a hard time figuring out, first of all, how to put this into 3 minutes, but trying to figure out like the perfect story and the perfect words. I just came up with a handful of words that to me described Mark: empathy, kindness, grace. But the one that I really stuck with, or the story that I want to stick with, is about joy. Mark had this unique ability to be critical, but not cynical, to show up. I just remember him showing up at conventions and at debates, at the NewsHour, and every one of the many stations of the cross of political life, always with a smile on his face. He was so engaged with it. And he was somebody who had every reason to come in feeling like, I don't have to be here. I've already seen all of this. I've heard enough spin and enough bluster and enough arguing. I give up on all of it. But that joy was genuine And it was a belief that the system is not broken. And fundamentally, having him there every day, again, being critical of the process, but engaging with the process, I think is why people connected with him so deeply. The one story I always take away from my time with Mark was, it was just another election night. It was 2014, not a particularly notable election, not particularly exciting. I think things ended up pretty early, so we could all go home at a reasonable hour. And there was Mark sitting right behind me as I was checking on a couple of races, and we stayed up way past our bedtime, 12 or 1 in the morning, so he could check in on house races across the country, names that he knew. He knew the races, he knew the districts, he went on the ground there. I remember sitting at an airport one time on the road to Cleveland right before the 2008 election to sit in a focus group. I was so excited I got invited. Peter Hart invited me to come to a focus group. Oh my gosh. Made it to the big kids table, and there was Mark Shields. He didn't need to be there, but he was there every time. And I end just with one note about his kindness and his grace. Judy's right, from the folks who greeted him at the door to people who would interview, he treated all of them with a level of respect and kindness that was equal. And I just think of him and remember just the kindness that he showed to everyone, especially those of us first starting out. And I thought, nice guys don't always finish first, but they always win. And Mark was a winner. Thank you.
Colby King.
Thank you, Judy, Ann, Amy. Some of the most rewarding moments of my life were the time spent on Gordon Peterson's Inside Washington show, both on air and during the breaks in the presence of Mark Shields. And I recall the weekly ritual, Mark shadling down the hallway of the green room. Shadling is sort of a mixture of shuffling and waddling. Mark Shields decked out in uniform, blue blazer, khaki pants, a light blue or striped shirt, an understated tie. Mark Shields greeting all of us panelists as if he hadn't set eyes on us in decades. And Mark grabbing the Washington Post. The first section he turned to was what he called the Irish sports page, the obituaries. Gordon Peterson announced discussion topics. He never assigned scripts for us to follow. But maybe because of my own insecurity of being on the panel, I often pontificated on the subjects in the green room. One morning, Mark pulled me aside and said, "Colby, don't tip your hand." My first reaction was to assume that Mark was warning me against revealing what I intended to say on this show. But I learned that with Mark Shields, it paid to look further, to think beyond his quips. Mark wanted me to know that first, you must know the hand that God has given you to play. Week in, week out. I saw him play his hand, revealing the triumphs and the failures in our politics, laying bare stories of the undeserved winners and the heroic losers, sharing his insights on government mishandling of things and political deceit, but often in a way that made you grin through your groans. And in the spirit of his advice to me, Mark always played his hand, and with his cards facing up, fearlessly and courageously, playing his hands with an amazing grace that stamps Mark Shields forever. Thank you.
Good. Well done.
Governor Kathleen Sebelius.
Anne and Amy and Francis, it's great to be with you today. I'm Kathleen Sebelius, but that's my cover name. I'm Jack Gilligan's daughter in this event because Mark Shields loved my dad and my dad loved Mark Shields. And it was 68, over 50 years ago, that Mark and the wonderful Ann Shields arrived in Ohio. They were doing retail politics, and they chose to come to Ohio to work on my dad's Senate race after Bobby Kennedy was killed. Lucky me. I knew a little bit of something about the way good candidates looked and sounded nationally and locally. I knew nothing about the genius managers and strategists who really helped them win, but boy, did I learn a lot from Mark. Mark Shields loved people. He loved the quirks and the oddities. He loved the fierce battles and the engagements. Mark had such an optimistic view of human nature. It made him hopeful. And it led to his belief that most people really were good, interested in doing the right thing. Mark felt if voters connected with a candidate and a vision that that candidate had, they'd be supporters and lift that candidate to victory. And Mark's optimism really led him to believe that government, a collection of people trying to do the right thing, had an essential mission and made a positive, even transformative impact on people's lives. That's an important concept to keep in today's world. He believed in generosity, the power of service. Mark was a really early adopter of that phrase that we heard so much during the pandemic, that we're all in this together. Mark always reminded people that we all drink from wells we didn't dig and are warmed by fires we didn't build. And when Mark talked about opponents, and he talked about opponents a lot, it was never with a mean spirit. It was insight into their personal character flaws that made people rethink their support and frankly laugh a lot. My father liked the idea of people and policies that impacted people, but in truth, my dad didn't really like a lot of people. Not a good characteristic for a politician. But my dad loved Mark Shields and his beloved Ann. And loving him made Dad a better candidate, a better leader, and a better person for the rest of his life. Mark was resilient, and loss wasn't an end, but a pivot to the next opportunity. He believed in redemption, in second chances and do-overs. And he believed that people had opportunities to reinvent themselves and find new ways to serve. He and my dad used to joke about me that I was in the witness protection program. I had taken a new name, moved to a new state, and then I could run for office. I watched Mark reinvent himself, going from a strategist focused on a single candidate in one election to a pundit and a prophet for hope for the country. His humor permeated his writing and talks. He became a Friday night favorite in households across the country, educating, analyzing, and inspiring listeners. Sorry, I had to write this down, so I'd try to stay to 3 minutes. I'm sorry I never directly thanked Mark for his impact on my career. I was inspired by my father, but I took to heart the lessons I learned from Mark. His hope, his humor, that engaging in retail politics was full of joy and enthusiasm, that he believed in shared missions and do-overs and new beginnings. I am so blessed that Mark and Ann Shields chose Ohio in 1968. We all miss him and need him, and I like to keep in mind the phrase, WWMSD, what would Mark Shields do?
Tom Davis.
Thank you, and Ann, Amy, Francis, thanks so much for letting me be a part of this. I do add something to this. I make this a genuinely bipartisan event. We have some lapsed Republicans, I think, but I have to say that I got to know Mark when I was campaign chairman for the House Republicans back in 2000, 2002. It was clear very at that time he had a lot of depth to him. We had a lot of engaging conversations. We had both served in the military. I had been an infantry officer Mark had been an enlisted man, and he used to tell me the closest he ever got to the officers club is when he cut the grass there on Saturday afternoons. At the gridiron dinner, he lamented the fact that as they played the different service tunes, Anchors Away and the like, you were supposed to stand up when your service came, that fewer and fewer of the Washington elites were standing up, and that feeling that somehow we were losing touch with the rank and file who were fighting the wars out there and enlisted men alike. In fact, at one point in one of his columns, Mark said, "Wouldn't our country be a more human place if the brass on Wall Street and Washington executive suites believed that officers eat last?" I thought that was very, very insightful, and I think reflected his roots and the fact that he never lost touch with the common man. He came out of politics at a different era, working for John Gilligan and Robert Kennedy and a number of others during that time period. He said at one point that he held the NCAA indoor record for concession speeches that were written and delivered. He cut his teeth in a different era. But he had a really great strength in that he knew what he didn't know. So he was constantly reaching out to find out what other people thought. And I look forward to our Friday afternoon calls when he would call me and try to get, what is the Republican perspective on this? Explain to me why they're doing this. We had many long conversations, and I just look forward to that. And then on the NewsHour that night, I think it helped him get a more complete picture of what was going on in the country. He also taught me that politics was a game of addition, and that if you wanted to be successful in politics, you needed to be a welcoming candidate and a welcoming party, and that when you started throwing people off and the like, you weren't going to go anywhere politically. And the best lesson he taught me was when you walk into a room, many politicians see friends and enemies. He taught me that when you walk in a room, you're better off seeing friends and potential friends. And that all through my political career, surviving in tough territory, that was some of the best advice that I ever got. Mark was in politics for the right reasons. He was there because he believed in people and he wanted to help people. And I think we can look back at his life and say he really made a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. James Carville.
Thank you. First time I met Mark, I was 35 years old. It was 1979, a governor's race in Louisiana for a guy named Bubba Henry. Also met Peter Hart, who can attest to this. Charles Guggenheim, no longer with us, was the media person. And we amassed 9.6% of the vote. I asked Peter if I could round it to 10. It looked better. And Bubba ended up with 9.6%, and I ended up with an idol and a mentor. And I thought I got a pretty good deal. And when I was telling Mary, who wanted desperately to come, but she has COVID, and I don't think it'd be a good idea to bring COVID to this crowd at all. And I was talking about a speech, and said, you know, Mark never looked down on us. By us, she meant political people. And H.L. Mencken once said, the only way for a journalist to look at a politician is down. To hell with H.L. Mencken. And Mark was at the pinnacle of journalism, the NewsHour. He had a column, he was Capital Gang, but he never looked down on anybody. And, you know, he grew up I looked it up, in Weymouth, Massachusetts, which is south of Boston. And from Weymouth to the Harvard Yard is 20.3 miles. It could be 2,003 miles. He never got into this coastal arrogance. He never thought he was better than anybody. And, you know, when you're starting out a career, you know, you're from Louisiana, you're C student, and all of a sudden you got Mark Shields and Peter Hart as your mentors and promoters, it ends up generally pretty well for you. And I think a lot of who I am today and the way I think today was shaped by Mark in 1979. He was never enamored with credentialism. He was never enamored with coded language. He was never enamored of people acting like they were more moral than other people. And we had a lot in common. I mean, we're both enlisted Marines. We're both cradle Catholics. We're both Democrats. Biggest dispute we ever had in our life was about Brian Kelly. But we'll always have a different view of that. But I loved him. He loved people like us. He had a real affection for people that were in the game. And he always thought that politics was about people and people's lives. And that has always driven what I've thought. So most of all, he was the greatest teacher that I could have. And so many of the lessons that he taught me, to this day, when you see me on television, you're seeing Mark Shields. We drank from the same vat. Thank you.
Well, that was something. If the first panel could take their seats and the second panel could take their places, and I would ask each of you, we've heard wonderful Mark Shields stories. You all have Mark Shields stories. So take just a moment and turn to your neighbor and tell your Mark Shields story while we're changing the guard here. Amy Shields Doyle, of course, is Mark's daughter, and she is our moderator. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you all hear me, or okay, you can, great. Yes, I am Amy Shields Doyle, and I'm Anna and Mark's only child. Not quite as experienced as Judy Woodruff, as you guys can imagine, so I'll do my best. As Judy and the rest of the first panel pointed out, my dad was, a very astute commentator on the world of politics and an all-around great guy. But I feel like it's this panel's job to show us his humanity, which is really what made him such a special and unique person to me. As I mentioned at his funeral, he was not an organized person at all. He was actually incredibly messy and had piles of papers in every room that he ever went into. And the only reason that's a little relevant today is that in one of the 5,000 reporter notebooks lying around our house, he wrote exactly what he wanted at the funeral service, as has been mentioned a couple times, the 3-minute warning and all that. Who should speak, what we should sing, the unpretentious nibblies that were to be served, which was pigs in a blanket. And my mom and I did the best we could, but his messiness finally got the best of him in the end, because we only found the final page of instructions on the reporter notebook paper long after we'd planned the whole service. So I thought it seemed appropriate to repeat those again here so that his wishes would be carried out. He wanted us to say that he was a man who loved his family, his alma mater, his friends, his country, and his church, who stood up for the underdog, the less fortunate, and the forgotten, and who believed politics was about justice. And he had hoped that we would have put the following FDR quote on the back of the funeral program: "The test of our progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have too much, but it's whether we provide enough for those who have too little." So if you want to honor my dad, and this is, I am repeating from what I said at the funeral, but I think my son actually said he did this, which I found was really amazing. Ask the parking attendant how their day is going. Root for the underdog. Buy a kid an ice cream just for fun. Call someone just to talk or tell them you love them, and always vote. This past Father's Day at 4 a.m, after another really bad night of not sleeping, my mom, after probably a few other sage words, said, "Mark, go to sleep. You've been so lucky." And he said, "I have been so lucky." And that was the end. I would like to introduce, I think probably the way Judy did it was great, so that we can just keep going through everybody. So I'll just mention who everyone is, and then we don't have to come back to me, really. Frances Doyle, my daughter, is right next to me here. She is the pride and joy of our family and my parents, for sure. And there's nothing my dad loved more than Frances's basketball stories. He was such an avid fan of women's basketball in general, which was an interesting thing about him. Darcy Bacon, here to my right, worked with my dad for 40 years. And while, as you all know, he knew so much about politics, Darcy knew about everything else and filled him in so he could look like he knew about everything else. Father John Ensler was very close to my dad. He was the pastor at Blessed Sacrament, my dad's local parish in Chevy Chase, and is now at Catholic Charities, and had a very special relationship up till the night before my father passed away. Father Ensler was there. Tom Roschert is my mom said, a newer, younger friend of my dad's, but he's really not a new friend. They've known each other for 25 years through my mom and her friend Molly, Tom's wife. But he can explain his relationship, which was partially extremely helpful to my mom in driving my dad to dialysis many days of the week for the past year of his life. And then Mark Russell, who probably needs no introduction in this crowd, I'm guessing, but we think that he's probably the only person who I would say is funnier than my dad from the DC area. And so, on that note, I go to Frances Doyle, my daughter, and you need the mic. Here we go.
Mark Shields was not only an amazing man publicly, but also a fun and hilarious grandfather. My older brother Jack and I would go to our grandparents' house every single Monday, from the time we were born until just after middle school. We called my grandmother Yaya and my grandfather Kaba. While Jack and I would sit at the dining table doing our homework, Yaya would be cooking dinner. Kaba's office was all the way up on the 3rd floor. He would be, quote unquote, working, but really he was researching riddles to bring down once dinner was ready. Once dinner was ready, I would call the home phone upstairs from the kitchen to let him know. He would always answer with the same opening lines. "Who is this? Sorry, do I know you?" Followed by his joyful and full laugh. At the dinner table, eating Yaya's delicious home-cooked meals, Kaba would ask the riddles and try his hardest to stump Jack and me. This was our tradition, every single Monday, and is something I will remember and cherish forever. For Yaya and Kaba's 50th wedding anniversary in 2016, we took a family vacation after Christmas to Costa Rica. If you know Mark Shields, you know his classic khaki pants, button-down shirt, and blue blazer. In a tropical place like Costa Rica, you'd think he'd bring a few pairs of shorts, some t-shirts, and hopefully at least one bathing suit. But he didn't. Kaba went on a walk through the forest to look at all the amazing animals, sat on a beach under an umbrella, and watched the sunset from our porch, all in his khaki pants, button-down shirt, and blue blazer. In my lifetime, he was not one to go swimming in the ocean, but he did in fact want to use the hot tub on our porch. Remember, there was one minor problem. He had not brought a single bathing suit. My mom, dad, brother, and I went out into the town we were staying in to a cute little surf shop. Here, they had a selection of bathing suits to choose from. It was my dad's glorious idea to buy him the official Costa Rican surfing team bathing suit. Everyone got a huge laugh out of this. Imagine Mark Shields surfing. When my mom, dad, Jack, and I were at the beach, Kaba would be in the hot tub, not wearing his blue blazer, but wearing the Costa Rican surfing team suit. I never saw it with my own eyes, but we'll take Yaya's word for it. After a wonderful 10-day trip of unforgettable memories, we packed our stuff and got ready to leave. Yaya and I were ready to go and sitting upstairs in the living room. Kaba came up the stairs with a concerned look on his face. He explained that there was some sort of creature downstairs that he found as he was packing. Yaya and I were immediately curious. He continued to call this mystery animal a starfish-like creature. This did not make any sense to Yaya and I, so we decided to go downstairs and check it out. As we pulled the pillow away from where it was hiding, we saw this starfish-like creature. Because I was only 10 years old at the time, I didn't know what it was, but it was definitely not a starfish. Yaya came to the conclusion that this was a scorpion. Scorpions are extremely poisonous. If you know anything about what a scorpion looks like, you'll know how ridiculous Kaba's description was. I snapped a picture of it and showed it to the rest of the family upstairs. Bravely enough, Yaya took the pillow and brushed the scorpion outside the sliding doors. Back upstairs, everyone, including Kaba, was hysterically laughing. What if he had been stung and had to be rushed to the hospital the day we were all trying to leave? I guess it would have been okay in his eyes because it was just a starfish-like creature. Don't get me wrong, my grandfather was and always will be known as a very smart man. But if you're ever in a serious situation, don't count on him to know the difference between a starfish and a scorpion.
I am a lucky woman to have known and worked with Mark for 41 years, which means I can't stick to one story, but I'll try to do 3 minutes. I met him in 1981 when he was host of a TV program called Inside Washington, though it was produced outside Baltimore and aired on a PBS station with a signal so weak, Mark said it took the moves of a safecracker to find it on the dial. We did shows on subjects that interested him about politics: family, sports, campaigns, losing, the press and leaks, money and TV ads, direct mail, polling. Most of our guests were friends of Mark's, both Democrats and Republicans, and we had a lot of fun. When the station made a really dumb decision to cancel the show, I began doing research for Mark. In 1984, I helped him put together a small book of his columns and radio commentaries on the election that should be required reading for anyone interested in politics. Mark was more than my boss. He was a friend and ally. He gave me advice when I needed it and comfort in hard times. He was unfailingly kind and appreciative, even when what I gave him wasn't that good, or he already knew exactly what he wanted to say. He was a gorgeous writer, funnier than anyone I ever knew, and a natural-born teacher. He had certain core beliefs. He taught me compromise is at the heart of governing, that before leaders take the country to war, they should sell the case to the American people, which made him as close to a pacifist as anyone I know. He wanted a draft so everyone serves and leaders know the consequences of war. He believed in public financing of elections because money is the single most corrosive influence in our politics. He liked the House of Representatives. He thought unions, or most of them, were historically a force for good. He believed there are good people on both sides of most issues, including abortion, but not Charlottesville, that you won't always be proud of the people on your side, and building majorities is about addition, not subtraction. He saw running for office as an act of courage, partly because losing is a rejection that's both public and personal. He admired politicians who told people what they don't want to hear, that inspired them to make sacrifices, and who remember where they came from. He liked humor that was self-deprecating, and he liked Mo Udall's story about walking into a barber shop in New Hampshire in 1976 and saying to the barber, "Hi, I'm Mo Udall and I'm running for president." The barber said without missing a beat, "Yeah, we were just laughing about that this morning." He wanted Iowa, and I love that story too. He wanted Iowa and New Hampshire to be first because people there get to know the candidates before they vote on them. And he never found a candidate for president who measured up to the promise of Robert Kennedy. Mark made me proud, and he inspired me as he did his audiences. He made me a better person, and I will always be grateful.
Father John Ensler.
I have two stories, short, very brief, but first bookends. The first, I was in 2004. I was recently appointed to be the pastor of Blessed Sacrament. It was a very superb pastor there named Monsignor Tuffy, who retired. I came took his place. Bethesda Magazine asked for a quote from Mark about this transition. And Mark said something like this. He said, listen, he said, "I love Ted Williams. That's Monsignor Duffy. But I also love Carl Yastrzemski. That's John Ensler. If you're a Red Sox fan, you know that story, two great players who played. It's the best of Mark. It's happy. It's Boston Red Sox, and it's humor. We celebrate that today. Second story is a little sadder, but I went to the house, and by the way, Ann, good to see you again, and Amy and Francis. Went to the house the very night before Mark died. John Carr, our moderator, asked me to go over, and I did, to be with him that night. I must say, he was as weak as someone I've visited who was so sick, on dialysis. At one point, I don't ever do this. I did a decade of the rosary because he couldn't talk. And I just said, I don't want to be quiet. I'll let me talk. He wanted to talk, but he was so weak. So what happens in a situation like that? I gave him Sacrament of the Sick, Eucharist, Holy Communion. I gave him what we call the Apostolic Blessing. I heard his confession, all those gifts. And I thought the next day when Ann called me, I thought to myself, you know, Mark Shields went to the pearly gates with a heart and soul ready, more than ready to meet the Lord, not just with those gifts, but with faith, with honor, with civility, with friendship, with love. I think Jesus said to him, Mark, get in here. Welcome home.
Tom Roschert.
When I first met Mark years ago, I noticed that he was fun and friendly and courteous and hilarious. And I noticed he didn't drink. And he noticed I didn't drink. And we talked. And he said that he'd been going to meetings on Saturdays in Georgetown for years. And I thought about it for a while, and I came back to him, and I said, would you take me with you to a meeting some Saturday? So the next Saturday, Mark drove me to the meeting, and he introduced me to some of the best people that he knew, who are now some of the best people I know. And after the meeting, he took me to breakfast across the street to see the group at a table I never could have attended without him taking me there. So we continued to go together on Saturdays to the meeting for a while, but I was hanging back on the margins and clinging to Mark. And he was thinking, come on, kid, launch. So one week he told me, I'm not going to be able to make it on Saturday, so you're going to have to drive yourself. So I went in first meeting without Mark. And as soon as I set foot in the room, the senior beloved grandmaster member, beloved elder who could confer belonging on anyone, came up to me and said, Tom, I'm so glad you came. It's good to see you. And I hope that you come with us to breakfast after the meeting. And I thought, wow, I didn't know he even knew my name. Mark, from miles away, called the play that made me feel part of the group, as Mark doing what Mark does. Years after he started driving me on Saturdays to the meetings, I started driving him on Wednesdays to dialysis. And he was the one who was dying, but I was the one who was in denial. And one morning I said, Mark, is there any hope? Is there any chance for a transplant? And he chuckled, and he said, Tommy, I don't think that would be a good use of resources. And I burst out laughing for the same reason you just did, because I laughed out of love. It's so Mark. It's like keeping, thinking of the others to the very end, taking it to the max, and also making me laugh as he was headed into dialysis. But that's how it was for me around Mark. He gave me the feeling I used to drink to try to get, but never got from drink, but always got from Mark. If he were here now, and I could tease him one more time, I'd say, Mark, rest easy. I'm writing your biography. And the title is Mark Shields, the Man and the Mystery. God, he would have hated that. But there is a mystery to Mark. Like, how come he was so much better than everyone? He believed that the most important thing in life was how you treat people. And he treated everybody as if they were better than he was. That was his ethic. That you could see it in his life. We could read it in his columns. We could hear it in his commentary. He believed that everybody deserved to be treated with dignity, no matter what. A lot of us believe that, but he lived it. And that's, for me, what's unforgettable about Mark. Watching him with people. And that's what left me so grateful at the end of his life, that I had had the privilege of spending time with one of the greatest teachers of how to be a good human being that I'll ever know.
Mark Russell.
When he walked into a room, you knew he was there before you even saw him. If he walked into a building, maybe one floor down, you knew he was there before you even saw him. You could feel it. A crowd would form around him when he entered the room, and there was that joyful greeting. How are you? How are you? And you had the feeling that he really wanted to know how you were. Well, good for you. How are you? Good for you. Forgive my Boston accent. I'm from Buffalo. So we know the quotes, I mean, on television and in his column that the Republicans would pay for a tax cut with a tax cut. That George Washington couldn't tell a lie, and Richard Nixon couldn't tell the truth, and Donald Trump couldn't tell the difference. We know all of those. Right? And then Mike Pence, and this was before January 6th, Mike Pence came across a little bit like your favorite aunt who refuses to admit that Grandpa has been drunk and disorderly in public, and she says, no, Grandpa would never do that, even though Grandpa is being taken off in handcuffs. I first met him in about the mid-'70s. The Washington Post printers were on strike, and Katharine Graham, the owner of the paper, dissolved the union. She destroyed the printers' union, and Mark Shields suggested that Katharine Graham would be Secretary of Labor in the Ronald Reagan administration. She said that Ronald Reagan could drive through in a convertible with the top down and never get wet. He said that criticizing Jimmy Carter is too easy. It's just too easy. It's like kicking a paraplegic. And that New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, the large, heavy Governor Chris Christie, when he lowers himself in the bathtub, the water level in the toilet rises. That's one of my personal collections. These are ones that I got personally. He would kind of whisper, and my favorite concerns the cannibal Jeffrey Dahmer. Do you remember the cannibal Jeffrey Dahmer? And when the cannibal died, Mark said that they opened him up and they found Jimmy Hoffa. He kept the faith, passed the collection basket, collected the money, and never asked for a finder's fee. Thank you very much. Thank you. Well done.
David, yeah, okay. David Brooks is up next.
You have no idea how hard it was to keep a straight face when Mark told that Chris Christie joke on the air. So, my name's David Brooks. Mark has asked me to deliver a rebuttal to all the nice things that have been said about him. For 19 years, we were on a segment together called Shields and Brooks. We wanted to call it Brooke Shields. We thought the ratings would be higher, but And Mark did this for a little while. It was Shields and Brooks with me. Before me, it was Shields and Jago. It was Shields and Gergen. Before that, I think it was Shields and Coolidge. Started out as Shields and St. Thomas Aquinas in the early days. I was going to tell the joke it was Shields and Attila the Hun, but that was actually Capital Gang. And so we were on the air for all those years. It strikes me as a little ironic that Mark said none of the eulogies could be over 3 minutes, because in 19 years, none of his answers were under 3 minutes. So. When I think of Mark, first of all, consistency. Every Friday, off and on for 19 years, the same highlighters, the same blue paper, the same rep ties, the same shuffle into the studio, the same phone on the talking to Peter Hart or Tom Davis from the makeup room, the same chocolates. The guy mainlined chocolates on election nights. And he would go on the air with just dribbles of chocolates off the side of his face. Sometimes the same jokes. He asked what would happen if in 1963 Nikita Khrushchev had been assassinated instead of John F. Kennedy. And his answer was, I don't think Aristotle Onassis would have married Mrs. Khrushchev. He loved jokes about, he loved, as many people have said, he loved politicians and sympathized with losing politicians. And he loved jokes about losing politicians. There was a Bob Dole line after he lost the presidency, I sleep like a baby, I wake up every 3 hours screaming. He often quoted, I think it was a Dick Tuck line, the voters have spoken, the bastards. But he had no sympathy for losing candidates, which was out of his heart. He loved Mo Udall, as you've heard. He loved Sargent Shriver. He loved John McCain. He loved and advised Ed Muskie. Mark once told me he was the guy who told Muskie, show a little emotion. In 2022, this is the only room I could tell that joke. I always loved covering the Senate, but Mark was more Democratic than me. He loved covering the House. He loved the representatives. He loved politics, and he came and emerged in a specific political era. His dad served on the school board. He came into politics in an era when the effectiveness of government and politics was very evident, and when people trusted government. It was the era of the GI Bill, the Fair Housing Act, the Voting Rights Act. It was a liberalism oriented around serving those in need. And it wasn't about cultural attitudes, it was about real problems. He was a man of optimism and pragmatism who admired optimism and pragmatism. And even in the last couple of years when so many people were pessimistic about America, he was not. He rebutted that. He emerged in a culture of self-effacement, which said, I'm no better than anybody and nobody's better than me. I remember one of my kids' bar mitzvahs, we foolishly did not have any chairs for people to eat their hors d'oeuvres. So Mark sat cross-legged on the floor of the reception area while everybody surrounded him. And he was just one of those guys who'd go down on the floor with you. He was just deeply egalitarian. And he was also deeply moral, and that's hard to say because now moralism often comes tinged with self-righteousness. But Mark always judged character before party, and he was an amazingly accurate judge of people. Politics can sometimes deaden your moral emotions, but Mark was a guy of transparent moral sentiments. I think a lot of that came from Catholic social teaching. Every year we would go to Catholic Charities when John was over there with people living lives of radical love. And Mark was at home and he dragged me to this group, which came to be a very special group for me every year for I don't know how many years we've done it, we skipped COVID. But it was Mark amongst his people. And one of the proudest moments of my life was we were sitting in the little conference room before going on the air one night, and I told him I was gonna marry my Anne. And he said, she is so worthy. Not worthy of me, but just a worthy person. And his affirmation and his seeing the quality of the woman who would become my wife was just a tremendously powerful moment for me. He was the ultimate paternal source of evaluation. And so I would say he had the effect on me that he had on many, which was to inform, but really to soften the heart. When Mark retired, they did all these clips of us going on through the years. And the thing that struck me, looking at some of the early clips when Mark and I are arguing, what a schmuck I was. And if I got a little softer and a little more emotional, it was sort of the Shields effect wearing off. And it has reminded me of something I've experienced in this room with Mark at Pope Francis. People just like a guy who tries to live like Jesus. And he really did that. So thanks very much. And I'd like to invite Ann Shields.
I want to thank all of you for coming today to honor Mark's life and legacy, including all of you who found a place to park in Georgetown, and those of you who will see the video later on. I also want to thank all of those who participated in the discussions today for their thoughtfulness, candor, and humor. Mark would have loved it. Thanks again to those who spoke at Mark's funeral. I told them they had had their shot and they were off the hook today. Most of all, I want to thank John Carr and Georgetown for putting together this remarkable event and hosting us all with such grace. Mark made a lot of free speeches for John when he was first getting this institute up and running. That's paid back now, John. The ledger's even. Over the last 3 months, I've been overwhelmed by the outpouring of sentiment following Mark's death. I have received hundreds of handwritten notes and emails relating fond memories and stories, or just appreciation of what Mark meant to people, some of whom he'd never met, some of whom he met 30 or even 50 years ago. Some mentioned chance encounters with him at the Safeway picking up a prescription, or at half-price burger night at the local pub, or buying his own pants at Joe Banks. What, you think I bought those pants? Even though he didn't know them, they felt they knew him, and they wanted to share with me what a profound loss they felt at his death. So I'm going to share with you a few of those sentiments, because they say better than I can what his life meant. Many remarked on his civility, his ability to disagree without being disagreeable. One said, "He taught me there is so much more to the measure of a person than his party affiliation or political ideology, that there are truly wonderful people with political views diametrically opposed to my own, and absolute jerks who share my views, but hopefully not my dinner table." His messages were always hope-filled, balanced, and framed within civil discourse with a touch of humor. Another said that after a sports event they had both attended, the writer said some very unkind and unfair things about the coach of the opposing team. Mark took me aside and quietly and discreetly, but firmly, taught me a lesson about the need for tolerance for the adversary, a lesson I never forgot and which I've tried to transmit to my children. Almost all of them mentioned his great sense of humor. One writer quoted Frank Skeffington from Mark's favorite book, The Last Hurrah. How do you thank a man for 1,000,000 laughs? While I was talking to Mark downtown, one wrote, a panhandler came up and said, would you give he asked for a quarter for world peace. Mark turned and said, a quarter for world peace? Why, I'd give $1 for world peace. It's the exuberance of Mark, the Santa Claus, that many remember most. His knowledge of politics and history awed many. He taught me and made me laugh. He was a rare combination of sharp analysis and intellectual format on the one hand, and reconciliatory demeanor, decency, and unassuming, witty posture on the other. For us as naturalized citizens, Mark Shields embodied the best of this country. He was always the moral compass on the program. He made his listeners listen, even David Brooks. He never put on airs or suggested that he knew more than anyone else, though of course he did. His thoughtfulness was legendary to those with whom he worked and to those with whom he just came in contact. He would always include notes to the organizations he supported with year-end contributions, most of which were not completed before the end of the year. Don't tell the IRS. To one of these recipients, he advised, "Keep doing what you are most satisfied doing. Believe me, retirement is overrated." This made the recipient smile, and now she keeps it framed on her desk. Fellow members of the Gridiron Club recounted Mark's quiet appearances at the bedside of ailing colleagues. One remarked that at the annual Gridiron dinner, Mark treated my father as if he were every bit as important as any cabinet member or Pulitzer Prize winner in attendance. One said he came to every talk I ever gave in the Washington area. He defended me in a random public attack. He sent me a book on Egyptian poetry because he knew I had just returned from there. He met my son, now 34, when he was 5 years old, and he always remembered his name years later. I could hear his voice as he came down the hall, full of joy, talking to and acknowledging all of us. Mark made me feel like the only one in the room. Even when talking to big shot politicians, he'd call to me to get over here. I want you to meet someone. He made you feel like you'd been friends forever. It's been a true joy to have a great man as a great friend. I was always so thrilled to tell my friends, I know that guy. He made you feel that only you and he really knew what was going on. Although most people don't love politics, especially right now, they respected his love and appreciation of both politics and politicians. No one could equal his knowledge of or appreciation for the people who put themselves out on the narrow window ledge of public life, believing that defeat at the polls an acceptable price to pay for the glories of participating in American democracy. He was like Tip O'Neill, big-hearted from the get-go. He was a strong role model for political analysts for whom he set a very high standard. During my own career in politics, he was a loyal cheerleader, both personally and publicly. Many writers mentioned how unique he was. People don't come any better than Mark. He was one of a kind, will always be just one Mark Shields. He's the only political commentator I know whom viewers treated like family. I met a stranger on a hike in the Blue Ridge Mountains, and when she learned I was from Washington, the only person she asked me if I knew was Mark. When I said yes, she treated me like royalty. I heard Father Jenkins of Notre Dame refer to Mark as a national treasure. What a huge loss at a time when the country and world need a lot more Mark Shields. And lastly, they emphasized what an influence he had been on their lives. We should be inspired to be the people Mark thought we were. He was one of my heroes. I've always tried to be like him, making a strong case for the things we believed in, but never letting it get personal or ugly. He made me feel special every time he entered the room. He became a role model for me as to how to engage with people on a personal level, optimistic, interested, with humor and joy. He was the greatest influence on my life. He taught me to believe in myself and live my life as a good person. He helped me get sober. His openness about his problem with alcohol inspired and moved me and many others. And so many simply said, he saved my life. As I think Kathleen said, Mark liked to end his speeches with a reminder to his audience that we have all been warmed by fires we did not build. We've all drunk from wells we did not dig. It's hard to imagine Mark building a fire or digging a well. Believe me. But that is, in fact, what he did. And we've all been comforted by his efforts. One correspondent even offered that Mark doesn't need any prayers, but it might spill over to his other friends who do. Queen Elizabeth, in her message to the American people after the tragedy of 9/11, said, "Grief is the price we pay for love. But I think Thornton Wilder had the better thought. The highest tribute to the dead is not grief, but gratitude. It's time to say thank you.
Thank you, Ann. That was lovely. So much of what we loved about Mark is because he loved you and your family loved him. Thank you for the great example of partnership and purpose and fun together. So many years. Both you and David made some remarks about my tendency to invite Mark to speak for nothing. Mark has a different version of that. He maintains I asked him if he believed in free speech. And he said, of course I do. I'm a journalist. And according to Mark, I said, good, you're going to give one. And he would often bring David along to talk to the people on the front lines of homelessness and hunger and whatever. And I always thought it was unfair to say that there was no payment, no reward for talking to our group. And then I overheard David say, what can you get on eBay for a plenary indulgence? This has been a labor of love. I want to thank our colleagues at the initiative, Kim Daniels, our co-director. Kim is going to become director in January. I am not going away. I am becoming founder. And Tim asked what was going to be different. And I said, you're going to raise all the money and deal with all the crazy people. And I'm going to think big thoughts. Speaking of raising money, someone named, let me get it right. Someone named Noonan has left a credit card at the desk. Thank you. If anyone else has ideas, actually you can pick it up. Christian has the credit card and the Fitbit. I want that Fitbit. Christian has been enormously helpful. Our student fellows, Sebastian and Margaret, and especially Anna Gordon, who has done so much to make this possible. Our friends at Georgetown, especially in the president's office, President DeGioia, Joe Ferrara, Mary Haynes, Jackson Menner, Tom Banchoff, and our colleagues in global engagement and the Berkeley Center, especially Amy Vanderveld, and all those who helped us today. Optimum Audio. Mark's demographic, there's no polite way to say this. Sound is a big issue for us. So we are very grateful to Optimum for letting us hear these wonderful reflections. Most of all, I want to thank Ann Shields and the Shields family for trusting and working with us to bring this celebration together. We do more things in honor of Mark Shields. I want to call your attention to the initiative's next dialogue, an online dialogue that Kim Daniels will lead on neglected voices in the clergy sex abuse crisis. It's Wednesday, October 5th at 12:30 with Black, Latino, Asian, and Native American leaders. Mark helped found this initiative 10 years ago, and since then we have done 150 gatherings reaching more than 250,000 people. Mark believed there is life and vitality at the intersection of faith and public life, and we're very grateful to him. As we conclude, we have heard from many people, but there are two voices we have not heard. One is the voice of a grateful nation. Here is part of what President Biden wrote Ann Shields when Mark died. I have always believed that the best journalism holds up a mirror to ourselves, reflecting the good, the bad, the truth. For decades, Mark held that mirror up with determination and grit. He was a force, and I hope you find some measure of solace in knowing that his legacy will live on through you and the many lives he touched. Mark believed that friendship was forever, that family was everything, that journalism was a calling, that politics was a vocation, that recovery was a way of life, that faith was a call to serve the least of these. And he shared that with us, and we have recalled it here today. There is one other voice we have not heard, and we remember and miss him today.
I grew up when a man was in the White House who said very simply, the measure of our progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much, but whether we provide enough for those who have too little. It's a very straightforward, as Franklin Roosevelt. And the other kind of guidepost for me in politics that I guess I learned from my mom and my dad, my family, was that every one of us has been warmed by fires we did not build. And every one of us has drunk from wells we did not dig. And together, we can't do less for those who come after us, and together we can do so much more.
Those were Mark's last public words on the NewsHour. Together we can do so much more. Thank you for joining us as we remembered Mark Shields, a husband, a father, a grandfather, a political practitioner, a journalist and commentator, a champion of human dignity and solidarity, a friend and example of recovery, a man of faith and service, of humor and hope, a leader who leaves a legacy in all of us. Thank you very much.